In a dense, mist-shrouded forest, where the trees twisted and groaned in the wind, a local legend whispered of a child born with an otherworldly mark. This mark was said to be a sign of dark power, a harbinger of unspeakable terror. The villagers would huddle around campfires, their faces illuminated only by flickering flames, as they spoke in hushed tones of the cursed infant. They called it a legend, a myth born from the shadows of the forest. But deep within these woods, a young woman named Arya gave birth to this very child, Ira. As Arya held Ira for the first time, a faint, pulsing glow emanated from the infant's forehead. It was as if the very essence of the forest had been distilled into this tiny, fragile form. Arya's eyes widened in wonder, her heart filled with a mix of awe and trepidation. She had always known that Ira was special, that the forest had chosen her for some unknown purpose. But this was different. This was a power that seemed to reverberate through the very fabric of reality. At first, the villagers were fascinated by the infant's uniqueness. They would gather at the cabin, their faces pressed against the windows. As they watched Arya care for Ira, they would whisper among themselves, speculating about the mark's significance and the power it might hold. But as the days passed, their fascination turned to fear. They began to sense that Ira was not like other children, that she was somehow tainted. They would whisper warnings to Arya, telling her to be careful, to keep Ira hidden away. But Arya was not one to be swayed by fear. She was a woman of the forest, and she knew that Ira was meant for something greater. As the mark on Ira's forehead grew brighter, Arya's world began to unravel. She became increasingly unhinged, sensing a malevolent presence surrounding her child. She would find strange symbols etched into the trees, and the wind would whisper dark melodies in her ear. She knew that she was not alone in the forest, that something ancient and evil was watching her, waiting for its chance to strike. And yet, she refused to give up. She was convinced that Ira held the key to unlocking the secrets of the forest, and she was determined to protect her child at all costs. But the villagers would not be silenced. They began to ostracize Arya, to shun her and her child. They would whisper lies about Ira, telling tales of dark magic and ancient curses. They would say that Arya was a witch, that she had made a pact with some malevolent force to bring forth this abomination. And as the isolation deepened, Arya's desperation grew. She knew that she could not protect Ira on her own, that she needed the help of the villagers, but they would not listen. In a heart-wrenching moment, Arya was forced to make a choice. She could either abandon Ira to the mercy of the villagers, or she could risk everything to protect her child. And so, with a heavy heart, she made her decision. She gathered a small bundle of clothes and slipped into the night, leaving Ira to the mercy of the ancient trees. The forest was dark and unforgiving, but Arya knew that it was the only place where her child could truly be safe. As she vanished into the shadows, the mark on Ira's forehead glowed brighter, as if sensing its mother's departure. The wind whispered a mournful melody, and the trees seemed to lean in, as if to listen. And in that moment, the legend of Ira was born. A legend of a child born with an otherworldly mark. A child who would grow up to wield powers beyond human comprehension. But for now, Ira lay alone in the forest, her fate hanging precariously in the balance. Would she be found by those who sought to do her harm, or would she find a way to survive in this dark and unforgiving world? The villagers would whisper stories of Ira for generations to come, their faces lit only by the flickering flames of their campfires. They would speak of a child born with a mark that seemed to hold the very essence of the forest. And though they would never know the truth about Ira's past, they would sense that she was different, that she held a power that was both beautiful and terrifying. But for now, Ira lay alone in the darkness, her future shrouded in mystery. And as the wind whispered its mournful melody, the forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would become of this cursed infant, this child born with an otherworldly mark. As the villagers trembled with fear, Ira's fate hung precariously in the balance. The forest, once a sanctuary, had become a malevolent force, its twisted trees seeming to writhe in agony as the wind howled through the mist-shrouded canopy. It was as if the very fabric of the forest was unraveling, and with it, the last shreds of sanity. Thorn, a grizzled local hunter, had assembled a group of brave villagers, driven by a mix of curiosity and desperation. They hoped to exploit Ira's supposed powers for their own gain. But what they didn't know was that the forest had a dark secret, one that had lain dormant for centuries, waiting for the perfect catalyst. As they ventured deeper into the woods, the air grew thick with an unsettling energy. The trees seemed to loom over them, their branches like skeletal fingers, reaching out to snare the unwary. The group pressed on, their flashlights casting eerie shadows on the forest floor. It was then that they stumbled upon Ira, her eyes fixed on the group with an unblinking stare. Thorn's initial excitement gave way to terror as he beheld the eerie glowing mark on Ira's forehead. The infant's presence seemed to be drawing them deeper into the woods, as if she was being pulled by an unseen force. The group tried to flee, but it was too late. An unholy presence had already taken notice of them, and it would not let them leave. The forest seemed to be shifting and twisting around them, the trees closing in like a living trap. Thorn's group stumbled upon an ancient ritual site, hidden deep within the woods. The air was heavy with the scent of decay and rot, and the ground was slick with a noxious greenish-black substance. As they explored the site, they discovered that Ira's mark was more than just a birthmark. It was a key to unlocking an ancient power that could either save or destroy the village. The ritual site was a gateway to a realm of dark magic, one that had been hidden for centuries. The group realized that they were not the first to stumble upon this secret. Others had come before them, and none had returned. Thorn's group knew they had to escape, but the forest seemed determined to keep them trapped. The trees seemed to be shifting, the shadows growing longer and more menacing. It was as if the forest itself was alive, and it was hungry. The group's flashlights flickered and died, plunging them into total darkness. In the blackness they heard the whispers, a chilling, raspy voice that seemed to come from all directions at once. The voice spoke of an ancient pact, one that had been forged in blood and darkness. Ira's mark was the key to unlocking this pact, and the voice seemed to be urging her to fulfill her destiny. As the group waited in terror, they heard the sound of rustling leaves, followed by a faint cry. Ira's eyes seemed to be glowing brighter, and the air around her began to distort. The group knew they had to act fast, or risk being consumed by the very power they had sought to exploit. But as they turned to flee, they realized that they were not alone. The forest had other plans for them, and Ira was at its center. As Thorn's group cautiously approached the ritual site, the air grew thick with an eerie, unsettling energy. The twisted trees seemed to loom over them, their branches grasping like skeletal fingers, as if warning them to turn back. But Thorn's determination burned brighter than the flickering torches that cast eerie shadows on the ground. He knew they had to make a choice: use Ira's power to save the village, or risk everything to leave the infant behind and prevent a catastrophic outcome. The group's faces were etched with worry and fear, their eyes darting between the infant and the ancient trees that seemed to be watching their every move. Thorn's voice was firm, but his words were laced with a hint of trepidation. "We have to do this. We have to use her power to save the village." As they began the ritual, a strange pulsating energy emanated from Ira's small body. The air seemed to vibrate with an otherworldly power, and Thorn's group felt it coursing through their veins like icy water. It was as if they were tapping into a dark, ancient force that had lain dormant for centuries. But as they delved deeper into the ritual, They began to realize that the curse was far more complex and malevolent than they ever imagined. The infant's power was a double-edged sword, and its use came with a terrible cost. The group's faces grew pale, their eyes wide with horror, as they stumbled upon an ancient text hidden within the ritual site. It was a dark, twisted tome, bound in human skin, its pages filled with cryptic symbols and forbidden knowledge. Thorn's group gasped in unison as they read the words, their minds reeling with the implications. Ira wasn't just a cursed infant, she was a vessel for an ancient, malevolent force that had been awakened by her presence. The villagers, who had grown to fear and hate Ira, were now faced with the reality that they'd unleashed a horror beyond their comprehension. They'd tampered with forces they couldn't control, and now they were paying the price. The group's faces were etched with a mix of fear and shame, their eyes filled with tears as they realized the true horror they'd unleashed. As the ritual reached its climax, Thorn's group was forced to confront the consequences of their actions. Would they be able to find a way to contain Ira's power, or would the cursed infant bring about a terrible ancient evil that would destroy the village and all its inhabitants? The outcome hung precariously in the balance, like a knife's edge poised between life and death. And then, in a heart-wrenching moment, Thorn's group made their decision. They would harness Ira's power and use it to banish the malevolent force back to the depths of the forest. The ritual was a success, but the experience had left them changed. They'd faced the darkness within themselves and emerged scarred, but wiser. As the ritual site fell silent, the camera panned out to reveal the eerie glowing mark on Ira's forehead. It was a reminder that the curse was far from over. The screen faded to black, leaving viewers with a haunting question. What's next for the cursed infant of the forest?